Hi, all. You're on mute, Christopher.
Hey,
Christopher,
Piper.
hi, Sharuk. Christopher, you're still on mute.
There we go.
Now
How's
you're
that?
not. Good, good. I'm going to tee up the presentation and just make sure that I can get through it. Tee it up and get, oh my goodness, that's a good background. That's very impressive looking, Jason. All right, I'm going to try and do screen share. Okay, host disabled screen share. Guys, I need screen share.
There you go, Piper.
Okay. Okay, let me get this up. Now, I've got this up, but let's see if I escape this. I've got to figure out how to get this, and here we go. Okay, here we go. All right, that's working.
Looks great.
All right, I think I'm going to leave this up so that when people come on, they see
What was
it.
the second slide, Piper?
That was an agenda slide.
Okay. Is that something that I'm reading or?
No, I'm
Okay.
going to introduce it. Then the next slide is you. Yeah, I
Okay,
introduce you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Gotcha.
Elaine, I don't know if you're up to date on this, but you actually don't have to be on as a panelist. We're not going to do the questions around.
Oh, okay, cool. So Piper, my link is as a panelist. I don't have an attendee link. I think Elaine's probably the same, I guess, at this point.
Okay.
I can send it out to you.
Do I need
Yeah.
it? Can we just sit? Can we
Yeah,
just?
why don't, yeah, I think you're better off. It's less confusing if you guys have attendee links as opposed to panelist links.
Okay. So do you want to send us a link or?
I'll send you
Sharuk,
one.
you're sending it to both of them?
Yep, no problem.
Oh, great. We're starting to get auction items, Linda.
Okay, we are all live now. Somebody says, FYI, if it matters to you, you are all live right now, so don't say anything you wouldn't want public. So thank you, Sally, for letting us know about that. And somebody asked if they can get a copy of the presentation, and we'll have the whole event recorded. But if people specifically want the presentation, we can provide that as well.
Hey, Piper,
Hi, Joe.
do you want cameras on? I can switch to another system where I have a camera on.
I do want cameras on when you're speaking. By the way, we are live to everyone who is watching the webinar right now.
Okay.
Okay, somebody asked me to email the complete present. Oh, got it. Now I got the email address. Okay, so all of you who signed on early, you get to see sort of the backstage planning of all of this. Be kind, this is our first countywide webinar.
So Piper, are you gonna manage the chat feature then?
Yes.
Yep, and I'll be there as well.
All right, we'll start this in 2 minutes. We are up to 101 participants. And growing.
And Piper, I'll send the recording over to you as soon as it's processed tonight, so you guys can post it on your website as well.
Thank
And for
you.
everyone else's information who is not able to stay till the end of the presentation, we'll be posting this, so you can view it whenever you need to.
And we'll post a link to the presentation as well. So probably easiest to get them both from napafirewise.org. All right, why don't we get the show on the road? Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the first ever countywide Napa County Wildfire Home Safety webinar, brought to you by Napa Communities Firewise Foundation with the wonderful support of Fire Maps. And I do want to provide a disclaimer right from the start. Fire Maps is one of the resources that can provide help with fire, but there are a lot of them out there. And NCFF, Napa Communities Firewise Foundation, does not endorse any particular vendor. And so we work with all of them and are agnostic about that. So I wanted to make that clear. We've got 4 speakers, give you information both about what NCFF is doing on a county-wide basis to help prevent fires, as well as things that you as an individual homeowner can do. So here is our agenda. We're going to be going through each of these, and we have some wonderful speakers with us today. So why don't we get started? Our first speaker is Christopher Thompson, who is the board president of NCFF. He's also a volunteer firefighter with the Napa County Fire Department and a co-director of the Deer Park Fire Safe Council. In his real life, which he hasn't been able to do much because we've taken so much of his time, he's self-employed and works as a consultant and an electrical engineer with projects throughout the world and offices in the Bay Area and Los Angeles. He holds a BFA and BS in electrical engineering. Christopher, take it away.
Thank you, Piper, and thank you, everybody, for taking this time out of your day to share with us or allow us to share with you some very important information. So let's go to our first slide, Piper. And I'm going to read off some highlights of the NCFF, who we are and what we do. And then the other speakers are going to get into a little bit more detail about some of the things that the NCFF is passionate about, but I want to give an overview. Most people that I run into understand what it is to be firewise and fire safe, but they don't understand what the NCFF is and what we do. So Napa Communities Firewise Foundation is a county-wide nonprofit organization, and we've been around since 2004. The mission of the NCFF is to reduce the risk and impacts of wildfires through fire fuel reduction. Another thing that you'll hear people say is fuel mitigation. Same thing. Napa County spans over 504,000 acres, 73% of which is designated as high hazard severity zone. That's very important to understand. We all live in that kind of environment. The NCFF represents about 30,000 residents through our fire safe councils. I say 17 here. That number you might see shift a little bit throughout the presentation because we're bringing on new fire safe councils, so it's floating a little bit. 94% of those fire safe council areas are in the designated CAL FIRE hazard severity zones. Next slide, Piper. So here's a list of all of the fire safe councils. I won't read all of them aloud, but you can see we've got 16 here, which includes St. Helena and Angwin and Calistoga, some of the more populous towns in the area. And this is how we get to the number of 30,000. Next slide. So what have we been up to? So let's talk about some recent accomplishments. We released a countywide CWPP, which stands for Community Wildfire Protection Plan. We're all going to try and use fewer acronyms through this presentation, but unfortunately there are some acronyms that everybody's going to have to start to get used to hearing. And one of them is the CWPP, because if you get involved with a fire safe council, one of the things that you do in that fire safe council is develop a CWPP, which is basically a roadmap for your community. We as the NCFF have done a roadmap for the county, which is made up of the smaller CWPPs. And that is basically a roadmap that tells us who, what, where, why, and when. There's no more guesswork to where do we have issues for potential fire. There's no more guesswork where we need to put our money and our efforts. That has all now been laid out in a roadmap that we call the CWPP, Community Wildfire Protection Plan, for the entire county. We, through a presentation that I made in April, on April 6th, we received a commitment of $6.4 million from the Napa County. Understand that up until April 6th, we had been working on $100,000 a year to do fuel mitigation work. So we went from 100,000 as of April 6th, it went to 6.4 million. And by the end of April, we had that money out in the community, boots on the ground, work being done. We're committed to spending 95% of the money that we get to doing the work that we advocate for, which is fuel reduction. In the last 4 months, the NCFF has executed over $1 million worth of fuel reduction work in Circle Oaks and Anglin. That's expanding, and now we're moving in to other areas, which is according to our 5-year plan, which you'll see later on in the presentation. The NCFF is also working with the California Fire Safe Council, which is sort of the larger organization. And we received $1 million fuel reduction, $1 million grant for defensible space efforts in underserved communities. And one of those communities is the Berryessa Estates, which covers over 180 residences. This is an area where people are having difficulty funding the defensible space work that's being asked of them. This money was put to use to help in that regard. The NCFF has over $11 million in fire protection and forest health applications being considered by CAL FIRE, which will cover all areas of the county. So if we get that $11 million, combined with what the money that we've gotten from the county and the California Fire Safe Council, we're going to be pushing $20 million of money that we are going to put to work in the county for fuel reduction. We've gone from 100,000 to almost, well, if we get the grants, close to 20 million. I mean, if we don't get the grants or only partially, we're still millions and millions of dollars ahead of where we were just a few months ago in trying to solve the problem that we have here in the county. The NCFF has submitted a $42 million budget for the next 5 years to the county. And now I'm actively participating with county members to work on a tax that we are going to ask the voters of the county to consider next summer, so that we can raise $100 million over the next 10 years to do the work that is needed. And what is that work? That work has been articulated in our countywide CWPP, and you can go to our website and see what that looks like. Piper, next slide, please. So we're going to talk a lot, and some of the highlights that I'm giving you here before other speakers participate is going to be what we're really passionate about. And one of the things that we're really passionate about is discussion of defensible space. And so what does it take for a fire? It takes oxygen, it takes heat, and it takes fuel. But we're not going to have any luck in removing oxygen, and we're not going to have luck removing heat, but we will be able to remove fuel. So if you want to impact the potential for a fire around your home or on your property, you remove the fuel that feeds that fire. So that's what this is all about. It's about fuel reduction on your property. We call that defensible space. Doing defensible space means you're removing that fuel from around your property. Defensible space is not just to protect your home from the wildland, it's also to protect the wildland from your home. 86% of fires start in and around the home. It's very easy for fires to transition from a structure fire to a vegetation fire. So we want it both ways. We want to protect your home, but we want to protect the wildland from your home as well. The 2010 census states that in Deer Park, where we were, and this is where I live, was devastated by the glass fire. We lost a lot of homes here. The 2010 census said that we have 546 homes. And what I've been telling people, if you want to know why defensible space is important and why it's important for all of us to participate in defensible space, is if you take my theory here, which is if we all had a home here that was 1/4 acre, that's 136 acres of hardened area that we could have had in preparation to both protect the homes in Deer Park, but also to take a stand on the fire that was coming into Deer Park. We did not have that. The reason why we didn't have that was because a lot of defensible space work that is now required was not done when the glass fire came through Deer Park. Next slide, Piper. So what does a fire season look like? Well, these are statistics from Napa County that I've highlighted over on the left. The glass fire, 40,000 acres burned, $750 million in damages, and that probably is a low number. It's now being discussed that that's over $1 billion. 1,022 structures lost. The LNU Lightning Complex, sorry, that's the spelling, Lightning Complex fire, 165,000 acres burned, 3 fatalities, and 522 structures lost. This is what a fire season looks like. And understand that where we sit right now, our fuel in our environment is far drier than it was when we had the LNU fire and the glass fire. So we need to be concerned. And that's why other speakers are going to talk about what the measures are that you can do in greater detail. Another thing that I'm very passionate about, next slide, what I'm calling 911 signs, or we call address signs. On the left-hand side, this is what we often see. As a firefighter, I want you to know that when I go out, it's 2 o'clock in the morning and I have a medical call, which I did, and it was for a heart attack, which it was, and we couldn't find the address to the home because it was buried in foliage. What we want people to do is take this seriously, because for us to help you, you have to help us. And so what we're seeing, what we're asking people to do on the right-hand side is this is what we're moving toward. We're moving toward signs that, and actually these signs are now required, but we're asking people to add more information. We had this information on the Napa Firewise website, but it gives you information, and it gives the incoming firefighter information. When they come up to your driveway, we know how long the driveway is. We know if we can get our engine turned around. We know if there's water there, and we know if there's defensible space there. And that's very important, especially when firefighters are coming in from out of the county as strike teams and they don't know the area that well. Next slide, Piper. So make defensible space around your home. If you learn anything from today's presentation, it is that this is not to be cast aside. Defensible space works. I can't tell you how many homes that I, as a firefighter, went to through the glass fire where we drove down driveways and there was no defensible space. The fire was bearing down on the property. There was no defensible space. In situations like that, we have to move on. Understand home hardening basics, which will be discussed later on. Pay attention to red flag warnings. Learn your zone. We now have what is called zone haven. We all now live in zones. So when you're asked to be prepared to evacuate or to evacuate, they're going to give out that zone that you were in. Learn your zones. And then when you're told to evacuate, please do so. And that's what I have to share with you. And I'll let the other speakers now get into some more detailed information. And thank you very much. Piper, we can't hear you.
You're muted out, Piper.
Okay, there we go. Thank you, Christopher. And we're going to have about a half an hour of Q&A at the end. So anyone who has questions on any of these presentations, please just put them in the Q&A section and we'll get to as many of those as we can. Thank you. Our next speaker is Joe Nordlinger, and he's Vice President of Grants for NCFF. He's also a volunteer firefighter with Dry Creek Lacoya Station 16, and he's president of the Mount Veeder Fire Safe Council. In his spare time, he's president of one of the largest global workforce management, technology, and life sciences consulting firms, ACS Solutions. Joe, it's all to you.
Thanks so much, and thanks to everybody for joining us this evening. I did respond to some questions via the chat feature. You can type the responses, Christopher, as well, so you might take a look at that. So we can try to respond to some of those. So the areas that I wanted to cover are really around how NCFF is working to help protect the county, some of the things that we're doing around plans and grants, and to get to sort of specifics around sort of the broad geographical support that we're providing and where we're focusing funds and efforts, and also to give you some indications and some resources that can help you as a property owner. So I think that, we're at this kind of nexus. Christopher talked about some of this in his presentation, where, the valley really faces a crossroads, and it's kind of important that everybody in the valley, residents, property owners, business owners, et cetera, really think about at a pretty specific level what you can do to really contribute to this issue. And I've been thinking about this issue for about 7 years, and there are, it requires sort of a real active thought process and commitment of some resources, and really stepping up in ways to protect your property and also to contribute to the larger community. So when we say that we're representing 30,000 residents and through our fire safe councils, those are the folks that we focus on. But we really are an organization that represents all residents in the valley as well, which is why we're doing webinars like this as well. So Christopher talked a bit about the CWPP, the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, and the hub site that we have, which has a tremendous amount of resources on it. We encourage you to check it out. It is nested within our napafirewise.org website, and there are a number of resources that we encourage you to take a look at, including your ability to actually see where you sit within the county as it relates to fire safe councils. There were some questions about that. You can look on the map and see whether you're in a fire safe council area. You can look on the map and see whether you're in a high fire severity area, et cetera. So please check out some of those things on the CWPP. I'm going to be focusing more on some of where we are in terms of chasing resources, and to get into more specifics to some of the things that Christopher talked about. So if you can move to the next slide, Piper, that'd be great. And this is, as you dig into this, we encourage people to think about, your role and your involvement. We need a variety of volunteers in the valley. We need volunteer firefighters. We need volunteers who are willing to contribute to Napa Firewise. We need volunteers at the Fire Safe Council level. And most importantly, we need homeowners and residents to step up and think in practical terms about what they can do with their homes. So the countywide CWPP that we created is kind of this reference architecture that helps us to think about how Napa Firewise is going to evolve, and how this whole issue around fire risk mitigation and fuel mitigation needs to evolve. For anyone of you that's worked with me, I've focused a long time now, 7 years, thinking about this issue and thinking about how do we get more money. And money is really the primary driver here. Christopher talked about some of our recent successes. And those are really, really important steps, because the reality is, for us to tackle this issue, we need a substantial amount of money to do and implement the strategies that we've come up with. And so that's a good part of what I'm going to talk about tonight, the money and where we're spending it on corridors, and then what resources are available for property owners. So the county-wide CWPP allows us to sort of think about things in terms of access and egress. It allows you to sort of look at things in terms of the regional historical fire complexes that have occurred in the Napa County area, the fire safe councils that I mentioned before, and then it also gives some clues and things about where you fit as an individual rural landowner in the valley. So it's based on a lot of state-of-the-art technology and a lot of wisdom from foresters and firefighters and CAL FIRE and our various stakeholders. So there's a lot of expertise that's gone into the creation of this document that's kind of a roadmap for all of us. So let's dig in, Piper. I'm going to talk first off about thinking about things in terms of corridors. Maybe to the next slide, please. Pardon me, this is one of the maps that talks about the fire history in the valley. So, that's also on the countywide CWPP site. I think the next slide perhaps shows the fire safe councils and the map of the fire safe councils, if you can share that, Piper. Yep. So there's our 16 fire safe councils. And again, on the site, you can actually pinpoint where you're located and whether you're within one of those fire safe councils. If you are, we encourage you to reach out and get involved. If you're not and you're interested in things that you can do, please reach out to Napa Firewise. We'd be happy to facilitate and get you some information. Next slide. Okay, so I talked about this before. The strategy for fuel mitigation in the county really thinks about things in the context of evacuation corridors, and those are county roads, limited access roads, which could be a private driveway that serves multiple residents, or a semi-improved road that serves multiple residents, and also legacy fire access infrastructure. So those would be things like old dozer trails, logging trails, Jeep trails, et cetera. And at the sort of the level of the corridors, we're also thinking about water source protection. At the rural land compartment level, all of those corridors create these compartments, and it's the compartments that we all live in, and the compartments are constituted by all of the rural land properties in there. So we're also thinking about, well, how do we direct and encourage landowners to take steps to reduce fuel on their property, and also harden their homes, and also make their properties more defensible, and also to think about making sure that you have adequate water storage at your home location on your property. So let's dig into some of that. At a high level, I'm going to cover corridors, and you can actually advance all of the animations here so that we can see all of this stuff, Piper. Thanks. So at Napa Firewise, and also at Mount Veeder Fire Safe Council, Napa Firewise in particular, as we think about funding to improve the fuel spacing and to do the fuel mitigation along these key county roads, limited access roads, and legacy fire roads, we have to think about things in terms of hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. And that requires understanding sort of where the funding sources are, the complexity of chasing that money, and then the cycle time of how often we can apply for it, and how long it takes for us to get that money. So this little graph here just gives you a sense that some of the money that we can pursue at the Napa Firewise level is relatively easy to pursue, but the dollars are relatively low. PG&E, for example, every year we pursue money for our fire safe councils for projects, and on average we can get somewhere around $150,000 to $250,000 for the county, and it's a relatively straightforward process. But as you move up that scale there, CAL FIRE, the fire prevention grants, the California Fire Safe Council grants, and then the CAL FIRE forest health grants, those grants become more and more complicated, require registered professional foresters to help us do the applications, to do calculations, all the way up to FEMA grants, which are probably the most time consuming and difficult to secure. But if you secure them, then you're talking about order of magnitude 5 million, 10 million, even 15 or 25 million. Some of us heard about money that was secured over in Sonoma through FEMA. So those applications, the bigger asks require more complex applications, which require expertise. In some cases, it's economic impact. It's carbon sequestration. So there's a range of things that make those applications more complicated, and that's the money that we're chasing to really bring home the dollars to the county to make sure that we can actually implement the long-term 5, 6, 7-year plan that Christopher spoke to earlier. Next slide. So that funding is what really is part of what we're focused on utilizing to really drive the 5-year plan that Christopher spoke to, which is around building the access and egress corridors and improving the fire safety for evacuations and response. So our 5-year plan includes year 2 projects, which are on the left, and then year 1 and 2 projects, which are on the right. And it gives you a sense for sort of these compartments that we're talking about creating. If we have time, I'll dig into subsequent maps, but basically you can see that we're starting to basically build out these corridors, reduce the fuel in them so that we can make sure that we can respond to a fire event and that people can evacuate appropriately. And as we chase this money, the county needs to understand, our residents need to understand that this is a game, kind of a strategy of matching. So the county has stepped up in a major way. They've provided funds. We're utilizing those funds as matching funds to try to go unlock additional monies from CAL FIRE and California Fire Safe Council, and even FEMA as we chase some really large dollars in year 2, 3, and 4 for our program. All of our strategies involve doing the work and the maintenance of the work behind. It doesn't work for us just to do a project and then not come back to it. We have to think about the cycle time of coming back to these things in years 3, 4, 5, 6, and on. So that's a high level about the corridors. I want to spend more time really digging into what a rural landowner can do about this issue. I suspect that many of our audience members today are large property owners or property owners in a rural setting, and they want to know, what can I do to actually do some work on my place? So let's dive into that. You can advance through some of these innovations, Piper. Yeah, so there are a few different things. There are resources that are financing resources and match and or grant resources that are available at the state and federal and local level. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has a program that's through NRCS. There's a local office here down on Jefferson Street, Natural Resource Conservation Services, and that grant program is called EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. And that program allows you to secure money that allows you to go out into your forested land. Let's say you have 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 acres, and actually reduce fuel loads, reduce ladder fuels, and basically do what's called lop and scatter, or chipping within the compartment. So think of your property. If you've got 10, 30, 40 acres, you're part of that compartment that's surrounded by the corridors that we're trying to do shaded fuel breaks on and fuel mitigation on those county roads and limited access roads. You're now in your property, and through the U.S. Department of Agriculture and through NRCS, you can secure funds that allow you to get out and do the work with a forestry plan. And this is not a harvest plan, although you can pursue a harvest plan if you're interested. This is just a plan that allows you to reduce the amount of fuel in your forest by going out and doing brush clearing and limbing up trees and reducing the ladder fuel that could potentially get a fire off the forest floor and up into the canopy. So EQIP is one of those programs. Encourage you to look out for it. You can reach out to Napa Firewise, but most importantly, just go to NRCS or RCD and they can help you access that. There's another program through FSA, the next slide. It's also through the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and it is called the Emergency Forest Restoration Program. It's similar to EQIP, but it's funded through a slightly different source. So it's a USDA program that allows you to secure funds, and there's an expectation that the property owner contributes to part of it, but it's money that can help you unlock. It's a program that allows you to unlock some resources to actually get into your forest and do forest maintenance or forest rehabilitation. Perhaps you live in an area where there was a burn scar and you want to go back and rehabilitate that forest or reduce some additional fuel, or you're in an area where there has not yet been a fire, but you want to do work to mitigate the risk of wildfire. So those are two programs, both through USDA, that are available to residents, rural landowners, and or folks that are in an agricultural area if you want to do work in your woods or your forest. Those are focused on forest health. There's another program which I like to bring to people's attention. It's a little bit obscure, but it's called the PACE program. And so some folks, if you're able to think about doing hardening your home or creating defensible space, obviously the natural thing is to go out and hire a contractor and do the work, and that's great. And maybe you have the financial means to do it and just pay for it. Maybe you have the financial means to actually finance it on a home equity line of credit or something. There are a set of circumstances where people don't have access to those kinds of resources, but they're interested in doing work that's hardening related or defensible space related. And so this is one program that's out there. It tends to be a little bit more expensive from an interest rate standpoint, but effectively what it allows you to do is a number of things that have both the effect of creating defensible space and or hardening your home, but they also contribute to energy efficiency and water efficiency. And what it allows you to do is to essentially finance work on your property. And these outfitters have different providers that they can work with to do the work. It allows you to finance the work on your property taxes. So I believe the PACE stands for Property Assess, Conservation and Efficiency Measures or something like that. So we're not advocating for any of these different providers, but it's a means by which you can access and unlock some financing that then gets repaid through your property taxes to do work which is both efficiency and conservation related, but also doubles as defensible space or hardening related. So let's dig into that. In the next slide, I can give you a little bit more detail about it. So if you think about it, defensible space could include expanding the perimeter around your house and installing drought-tolerant landscaping, meaning limited irrigation, gravel, no vegetation, fire-resistant plants, etc., removing things that are more flammable. So that's one of the things that PACE does, because it's a measure that is a water conservation measure. Other things that they do are they fund and allow you to do larger scale water storage systems and or rain catchment systems. So we live in an area obviously where there's drought, but during the winter, even if you get 14, 15, 16 inches of rain and you've got a decent roof line, you can capture that water and store it in a water conveyance system that potentially is gravity fed or hooked up to a fire hydrant. So water storage tanks, water storage systems that are rain catchment, gutters, downspouts, et cetera, is one of the things that you can finance through PACE, which is obviously a fire response measure that might be helpful for your home. Other things that cover both dual efficiency and hardening are things like fire-rated roofs and windows, claddings and sidings, skirtings under your deck, high-efficiency sprinkler systems. So these are all things, again, they double as both a hardening measure and an efficiency measure. And so you can certainly go out and get a contractor to do this work and do it with your HELOC or pay for it out of pocket. But if you aren't able to do that and you need some alternate means of financing, PACE may be an option for you. And some of these folks offer a variety of different partners who are PACE certified to do the work. Lastly, there's energy independence. Obviously, if the power goes out and you're set up with solar or batteries, et cetera, could be a decent thing for fire response. So just some ideas to think about that might help you think through resources that you could access to help with hardening exercises that also are energy efficiency or water conservation measures. Next slide. Okay, so one thing that I like to this is a great example in the Mount Veeder area. One of our original projects was something called the Old Ridge Road. And the Old Ridge Road is a ridgetop fire break that the community pulled together, got resources to build out, and essentially install a shaded fuel break along 3 miles above the ridgetop between Dry Creek Road and Mount Veeder Road. And I bring up this example because if you're a rural landowner, you're connected with a fire safe council or you're not connected with a fire safe council, we want people to be thinking about what projects are in your area. And what we're looking for are things like county roads, obviously, but limited access roads that take you to the top of a ridge, or an old ridgetop dozer trail that potentially is a resource that could be helpful in the response to a wildland fire conflagration. So I'm just going to check through some slides here so you can get a sense for what this Old Ridge Road fire break was. It was instrumental in the Nuns fire and actually made a difference in terms of protecting some homes. You got some before and after pictures that show you the fuel spacing that occurred on the Old Ridge Road. We secured money from the county, from California Fire Safe Council, from PG&E as well, I believe. And we essentially established this 3-mile corridor along the ridgetop. And I'll show you some pictures of what actually occurred in the 2017 Nuns fire. So there's some before and after pictures. We'll clip through some more. You can see very dense brush on the left-hand side, opened up under the canopy, beneath that the trees. Again, before and after pictures that you can see of that fuel spacing that we created along that ridge line. And in the 2017 Nuns fire, this project actually made a pretty big difference. I was up there that day fighting the fire, and you can see in these pictures on the lower left-hand picture, on the left-hand side, that's the western side of the ridge, fire burned up underneath the canopy because there was a shaded fuel break, hit that mineral soil on the dirt road, and the fire stopped and it didn't cross over. There's a picture in the middle there. You can see pretty substantial fire burning, and basically the embers stayed on the west side. And then the picture on the right is similarly, the west side is on the left and the east side is on the right. So that fire break was very successful. It actually allowed about a day and a half of additional time for responders to get up there and really protect a variety of homes. And it ultimately sort of halted the forward progress of the Nuns Fire on the east side of the ridge and allowed CAL FIRE to get up there and install a 3/4 mile long wildland hose lay that really stopped the fire from proceeding further south along that side of the ridge line. So I bring this up because I encourage people in rural land areas, homeowners, et cetera, to just think about the topographical features that are in their area, where there's potentially an old dozer trail. Those are the things that we want to bring to the attention of the Fire Safe Council so that we incorporate them in our pursuit of funds. I showed this slide before, so we don't need to cover it again, but what I do want to do is just kind of blitz through our 5-year plan and some of the areas where we're spending money. This is available on the county site and it's on our Napa Firewise site, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but the year 2 projects that we're pursuing with some of the money from the county and using the county money, the $6.4 million as matching. We've chased money, as Christopher mentioned, with CAL FIRE, and we'll be pursuing money with California Fire Safe Council and other areas. But includes money that we're going to be spending in Dry Creek, Mount Veeder, American Canyon, Angwin Community Fuel Break along the Friesen Lake to White Cottage area, Sharp Road Fuels Treatment up in the Diamond Mountain area, Timber Hill Park down in Partrick Road. Calistoga includes Old Lolly Toll, Franz Valley, and Diamond Mountain Roads, Deer Park around St. Helena Hospital. There's a perimeter fuel break that we're building around the Yountville Veterans Home. And the Fire Safe Councils all have some specific projects which are to be funded in our year 2 projects as well, in addition to the fact that all of these projects require CEQA or environmental clearance, and so we have to spend money on that. So again, the money that we have today, we're using as match to go chase more money. And if we secure that money, which we think we've got a pretty good chance of doing, we're going to be able to spend it on these projects in year 2. The next slide is, I think, year 3, and it gives you a sense kind of map-wise what we're focused on. I'm going to keep hustling through here so that we make time for the others. Year 3, $9.65 million. You can see on the map there some of those strategic breaks. That includes Wild Horse Valley, Skyline Park Fuel, maintenance of these strategic dozer lines that I talked about before. The shaded fuel break, Circle Oaks, we've already covered. Let's go back, advance. The fuel break. Okay, let's just move to year 4. That's fine. $8.5 million. If you could just advance to the next. Yep, so this is a map. Again, you can find all this on the Napa Firewise site. Let me just cover some of the projects that would be in year 4. Year 4 is additional work out in Mount Veeder. There's a large amount of work that we need to do up in Spring Mountain. Various Estates has maintenance of some of their fire breaks. Napa County evacuation roadside maintenance. From year 1, we would go back. Again, I talked about the fact that we'll do maintenance. There's work that we want to do at Silverado Country Club, a perimeter fuel break. We're searching for some additional funding to accelerate some of that, maybe next year. Maintenance of Berryessa Pines subdivision. There's Fire Safe Council specific projects, and then additional environmental studies. And then year 5, we can cover that quickly. If you can advance the next slide. Okay, great. So again, the map, hard to read, but take the time to look at it on our site. And let me just dig through some of those projects quickly if we advance to the next slide. So this is a lot of going back and maintaining some of the earlier priorities. The Circle Oaks project that we did, work that we've done in Angwin, the Berryessa Highlands fuel breaks. There's maintenance of some legacy fire roads from the Nuns Fire in 2017, evacuation routes and roadside maintenance from year 1. Work up in Calistoga, ridgetop fuel reduction around Sharp Road and around Diamond Mountain, and then more of those CWPP and FSC specific projects in addition to more environmental studies. So again, high level here, what we want you to think about is the work that we're doing to spend the money that we have and use the money that we have to unlock additional funds through all this grant work is to really drive this 5-year project, very focused on corridors. And the other really important thing is we're really wanting to make sure that we help residents understand the resources that are available to them so that they can go think about defensible space, clearing the vegetation from around their properties, and hardening their homes. And generally the bang for the buck is on defensible space for $2,500, $3,000, $1,500. You can do a fair amount in terms of defensible space. Hardening is a little bit more expensive. Both are critical to protecting your home in the event of a wildland fire. And thanks so much for hearing us out tonight. We're happy to share information. We're a great resource if you reach out to us at Napa Firewise, and let's all be safe this summer.
Thanks so much, Joe. There's an awful lot that we're doing, and a lot of it is really due to your skill and knowledge about grants. So that's terrific. Our next speaker is Chief Jason Martin. He's the assistant chief with 29 years of experience with CAL FIRE. He'll be assuming the role of interim fire chief starting next month. His experience includes Type 1 Plan Chief for Incident Management, Team 4, Hazmat Technical Specialist for the Napa County Interagency Hazmat Team, and a member of the Interagency Rescue Team. So this is our uniform and the guy who knows what's out there. So take it away. Whoops, what just happened? There we go. Okay.
A little bit of a glitch. You can go ahead and we'll bring it down to the next slide, please.
Okay.
All right. So first off, thanks to everybody. If you can tell from what Christopher and Joe and the Firewise Community Councils and the Napa Community Firewise Foundation have done, the work is phenomenal. But they're just providing one side of the work, and this is where we come into play. With those fuel breaks and the treatment of the fuels, it allows us to deploy resources much faster, and we have a better outlook when we're able to reduce some of the fuels. What I'm going to talk about tonight is kind of the defensible space, that term that we've been hearing in the two presentations, and what does that mean, and how does that work with the fire department, and how do we assess that, and why is it important that you consider doing this for your homes? So the first thing is, when we talk about defensible space, it is connected with the Public Resource Code 4291. And in summary, basically what that says, you as a homeowner have the responsibility to ensure that your lands, the lands in which your property are on, are free of vegetation that will reduce the risk to the structure from a wildland advancing to your property. And then on the other side, in the event that your house catches on fire, it prevents your fire from moving in to the property of others. So that's kind of in summary of the long Public Resource Code. We have found through the years that each one of the homes that have defensible space, and as I kind of have it up here on the screen for everybody, is that it provides us a buffer. It starts to reduce the amount of energy that's available to the advancing fire. So if you can imagine that the vegetation that is out there while it's burning is like battery, it's fuel, but we're adding more and more fuel, which is more and more energy. The more energy that we take out of it, the slower the fire will then advance. With defensible space, this is exactly what we're asking. So to protect your property, to defend it, is that if we reduce those zones and reduce the amount of energy that's available, we have a greater chance of defending the property and reducing the loss. So just as of late, a few years ago, there was a new zone that was added, and that was zone 0. That's the zone that's around the house within the first 5 feet. And there's a lot of concerns with how are we going to do this? What does it look like? You know, everybody likes to put their ornamental vegetation, make their houses look really nice. We don't want this moonscape because you live in this beautiful valley. There are several plant species that are available that are non-flammable. They have a very high water content, very little die-off that are available. So if you go to your local nursery, they'll have a list of plants and options for you if you choose to start to reinforce your home. So why we have this zone is that sometimes the loss of the structure is not from the fire front, like you would think, or you see in the movies, this big flaming front comes over, it gobbles up the house and it moves on. It's more of the ember cast that is produced from the surrounding vegetation. And sometimes that ember cast just drops into the available vegetation around the house. Then it catches on fire, creates that heat source, and moves into the property. So it's important to kind of understand that. And there's a lot of misunderstanding, or a lot of people just don't know exactly what to do and how to do their defensible space. So I suggest that you go to readyfire.org, which is one of our CAL FIRE sites that has a whole bunch of tools for the homeowner to better understand how best to protect their property and also develop a plan. Next slide, please. Okay, within the county, we have our own ordinance, which is 8.36, which is our version, our enhancements to the public resource code for compliance. I put this slide up for how many inspections our code enforcement does. As of to date, this was yesterday, 1,564 inspections. And they're having to go out and do these inspections. And as you can understand how many properties we have in the county, it gets very difficult to hit all of them. But they are available. I saw some of the comments of how do I get my neighbors to comply? Just call the Napa County Fire Marshal's office, leave a message if need be, or talk to the code enforcement agent, and he will schedule an inspection, not only on your property, but also on the neighbor's property. And we have here the number of consulting inspections. Those are inspections that they come out, or the fire guys come out, and they inspect your property and let you know what needs to be corrected to get prepared, so that you can be in compliance with the public resource code. And then, as mentioned earlier as well, for those that have been doing the work and they may not be aware, we do have the Napa County Chipper program through the Firewise Foundation. That program we stand up in the early part of the summer or late spring and run it into the later part of the fall. And it's a free service to community members to chip the vegetation that they've cleared from their property, but they don't have the means to haul it away. So we chip it, we leave the piles for you, and it's a way for us to reduce the impacts of vegetation management within the county. Next slide, please. Next slide. All right. So I wanted to give some examples. So a lot of people have asked me in passing, what is, I'll go back one, please. In passing, what does defensible space look like? And how do I know if I'm doing it right? What do I need to take away? Piper, can you go back to the last slide, please? Okay, so this is, oh, there we go. Okay, so this is kind of a typical environment that we're going to see here in the Napa Valley. There's a lot of green. We like our green. This is ivy, which has got a big duff layer, captures all of the leaves that surrounds the house. This would allow, oops, please go back one more, please. There we go. Okay, so as we look at this, a lot of folks may say, well, I like my ivy. However, it does create a hazard because it provides a pathway for the fire to get onto the property and up next to the residents and up underneath the eaves of the structure. After we do a fuels treatment, please go to the next slide. There we go. Okay, so here's after a fuels treatment. As you note, the We've modified the fuels. We've taken out the ground litter. We've increased the height of the trees so that the fire doesn't have a tendency to get up into the crowns. And we reduced the amount of loading that was next to the property. Next one, please. And I have a couple examples here for everybody to kind of take a look at of what we're talking about with fuels modification and or defensible space and how we see it from the fire perspective. Here's another property. This is not a defendable structure at this point because the fuels are continuous up into the underdeck of this structure, which would be very difficult for us to fight and increases the risk of the firefighters that are there. Next slide, please. Okay, now you can see after the fuels modification, sure, it opened up the property considerably. But you can start to see the arrangement of the fuels, which are now reduced and away from the structure, which allows for defense. So the fire wouldn't burn up underneath this huge deck that is on this piece of property. We may get some ember cast, but now it's defendable with a simple hose line. And it gives us an advantage to escape if we need to. And we can also see as the fire progresses towards that property. Next slide, please. Here we go. This is just another example of that. This is another picture of that same property. And I apologize for that. I thought I took this one out. You can go to the next slide, please. Here we go. All right, so this is the other side of the property. That second slide is what that front end or the other side of the house looked like. And as they cleared it all the way out, they trimmed up the trees, they reduced the ground fuels that are available and provided a buffer between the wildland component, the brush component, and the property, which lends itself to be a defendable structure at that point. Next slide, please. And this is just another example, as we can see, kind of like the first property we had in the slide deck with the ivy, a lot of green around the house. And I think a lot of us are kind of lulled into that. They see the green, they're like, it must have a lot of moisture in it. The unfortunate fact is that it doesn't carry a lot of moisture through the summer and is very flammable. Next slide, please. And now we have a good example. There was a tree that was removed out of this that was close to the property and was not in good shape. So the dying vegetation was also removed along with the ground cover, which then provides a defendable buffer around the property, especially those properties that are built on a hill that have a large overhanging deck. Decks are very problematic to us because they like to catch the embers like a catcher's mitt, and they're hard to, they're hard to catch early on as they start to fester and burn. But if we reduce the amount of loading that is around them and eliminate the majority of that light leafy duff that is in our environment, we reduce the ability for the fire to have a large amount of ember cast close to the structure. Next slide, please. Oops, wrong way, other way. Okay, so those are some examples of what defensible space looks like. And those are done very, very well. But you can see the difference between the before and after photos of how much vegetation we had around the structures, and something that you may have been looking at for 20 years, not realizing that it provides a hazard to you, your property, and your family. And then what the properties look like afterwards. Now, some folks have asked me, well, I don't want to moonscape my property and have it look like, you know, I'm out in the desert, because we are in the Napa Valley. Again, I recommend that you go to your local nursery and ask about what kind of ground cover is non-flammable that I can plant around my house to harden my home, to then have it aesthetically look pleasing to you as well, but also protect your property. So then the other question is, what do we do as firefighters when we're barreling up some driveway in some community in which we're providing fire protection? And how do we go through a process if we're going to stay at the property or not? Now, we want to protect as much property as we possibly can. That's what we do inherent with firefighters. We're going to save whatever we can. We're going to take a lot of risks to do so. However, we have to triage those properties to find out if we're going to be successful in that operation, and we're going to be able to do it safely, because we do not want to kill ourselves. Sorry to use that on our video, but we have to make sure that we're not putting ourselves in jeopardy to where we can't go and continue the firefight. So the first thing that we look at for a structure is it non-threatening? Is it not within the fire environment? Does it not pose a risk? Is it kind of a non-factor? And then we move on from there. Now, the next ones are, is it threatened but defendable? And that really means, can we get up there? Can we get our engines turned around? Is there some sort of water source? Has there been a reduction in the fuels that are around the property that allow us to operate? And in the event that the fire overtakes our position, is there a place that we can kind of ride out the structure and be safe, and then move on once the fire front moves through? And then the last one is threatened, non-defendable. Those are those structures that there hasn't been any mitigation measures. The fire environment isn't conducive to us staying. So our threat to us, which is life, is much higher. And so we'll have to move on from that residence to avoid the entrapment. We hope, and we know with defensible space, that if defensible space is deployed and the house is hardened through hardening the structure as well with your vents and your roof type and your gutters, that the structure itself has a higher probability of surviving without any action from the fire department than is if we were there. And that's really what we need to get to. And to what Christopher was saying in his presentation, if you can imagine how we could change our environment if all of us together were able to collectively take care of our properties and break up this massive amount of vegetation that we have growing on our properties and in and around our structures, that we start to reduce the amount of energy that's available, which thus reduces the ability for the fire to spread, if you will. Next slide, please. Okay, so we talked about defensible space. We talked about how the firefighters look at a property when we are in the fire environment. And another part of this is the community. So our primary mission when a fire is impacting the structures in urban interface is life safety. That's our number one. So the glass fire was a rapid emergent incident. It was moving through a residential area. We were starting to do firefighting. The conditions changed rapidly for us, and then it became a rescue mission. And so I have another slide about evacuations. But the big thing on this, not everybody may understand, is that us as firefighters, when we go into a community, we may not be familiar, we may be having resources outside the area, they're going to look for somebody that's going to give us some additional information. We seek out data during our whole process. We're looking for bits and pieces to make a decision. We kind of start to gather these chiclets, if you will, that help us guide us in which direction we need to go and what is a priority. The biggest one that we find is the most helpful outside of defensible space, somebody that knows ready, set, go, is like community members that can tell us if somebody, one of their neighbors is home, or they have a disability, or they have a special trait, or they have large animals, or they may be one that wants to stay at their structure. We use those community members to get some intel, and we start additional resources if needed. And they also ensure the accountability that if a fire had run through a community, are they able to account for them? Who are they? Do you know, did they have an evacuation plan? Where would they have gone? Do you happen to have a phone number? Something that then the sheriff's department can track them down to confirm their location. And then there's the new thing that the sheriff's department is promoting, that's called Zone Haven and Know Your Zone. I have a slide that kind of talks about Zone Haven, but I certainly hope, and I will get into it just a little bit, but if you don't know about Zone Haven yet, I employ you to look up Zone Haven, get familiar, figure out what your zone is, because it's all about the messaging. We have seen how fast our fires move through our communities and what the reflex time is to get notification and to get moving. The community signage that we have on there is kind of connected to the address signs and what's available to us, and kind of gives a roadmap to not only the responders from the valley, but also the responders that come to help us from around the state. Next slide, please. Okay, oops, one of my others. Okay, perfect. So signage, it was mentioned earlier, I believe Christopher had it in his presentation as well. And it's kind of something that they've been starting over the last couple of years to ensure that we get some additional data. Like I said, we're trying to get as much information as we possibly can to make a decision on which direction we're going to go. The valley is comprised of a whole bunch of properties that are up these long, steep, narrow driveways. And from a firefighter perspective and a supervisor, you need to evaluate the risk. So there's so many unknowns, and if we run out of time, we're not sure if we can get up to the property or not. We may pass it. We don't know what's available to us. So when we look at the sign that's on the right, this is a sign that gives us some really good information that we add to our structure defense. One, we know what the address is. We know how many structures are up this driveway. If it has a water supply, because water is a very big component of fire suppression and also survivability for us. So how much water do we have available to us in the event that we get in trouble? Can we hunker down and continue to squirt water to protect us and then leave the area? And can we turn the fire engine around? Because we can't back down a driveway in a rapid fashion without additional risk. So then when we look at the addresses on the left, this is also another thing that happens in this valley, is that we have these long driveways that go up to, some people don't know where they're going, and they pop up and all of a sudden there's this sign and there's 10 or 15 addresses on it. But they're not too sure which direction to go and how to get out to those addresses because they're in and amongst the vineyards or what have you. And so clearly marking what those signs are. If the blue dot on these gives me a water supply, it tells me what direction each one of those properties are. And so I can move resources in to adequately protect or defend them. So that is another big thing. I know through the Firewise Community Councils, they've been promoting signage for several years. And I recommend, it is one thing that you can do. And through the fire marshal's office, they can help you with the verbiage that would be required on your sign. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a big, giant, huge, long slide, but I basically took it off of our website. But if you haven't heard of it, the Ready, Set, Go program that CAL FIRE put together several years ago. This program is a roadmap for you and your families to kind of understand, how do we plan for a catastrophic event in California. What does it really mean? And what are the things that I need to consider? So the first part is the plan. And I talked about, there's some elements in this. One is the defensible space and the hardening of your property. Two is, do you have a plan with your family if you're not at home or they're at home, and where do you meet up? Do you know what your neighbors are up to, and have you made a community plan with them? All those kind of go together for that first part of it. It's just the overall planning. Now the ready is, how do you get ready and when do you start it? And if we're talking about defensible space at this time of year, we're a little behind, but we should be getting ready as we move from the winter months into the spring months, and then early part of summer to prepare and reduce some of the fuels that are around our home, and double check and inspect our property for any damage through the winter, and ensure that we don't have any holes or gaps within the structure, so that it can reduce the embers that may come if we get a fire. And then the set is really preparing the family. Having a plan, even walking through the plan or running through it one day, one weekend that you want to go out to the grocery store, something to that effect. It's a simple event, 15, 20 minutes of saying, let's go ahead and see if we're ready to evacuate. How do we all do that, and do all the family members understand what their part is in an evacuation, especially in the environment that we live in here in Napa. And then the go. So when we say evacuate, it's go. And I do have another evacuation slide in here, excuse me, that talks about evacuations. So please take a look at it. You can also go to readyforwildfire.org, and it has all these toolboxes on it available to you, so that you as a family can prepare and have a better understanding of what is required of you. Next slide. Okay, zone haven, we talked about that earlier. What is it? How does it work? Who created this thing? You may see some flyers, heard it on the radio, something to that effect. Zone haven basically is a program that assists us from the fire department side and the sheriff's department. So when we have evacuations, the sheriff's department and the fire department team up together to make the decisions on moving people. And we have to send out like a Nixles alert that says, hey, we're going to evacuate this area. It could be a warning or an order. The warning is to get you ready to start moving. And then the order is you must leave. And so what Zone Haven does for us is it breaks up the county into smaller pieces, so that when we go to message which zone is going to be impacted, it's kind of packaged in this pre-assembled, pre-planned message, if you will, to ensure that we can try to speed up that communication to our community members. So if you haven't become familiar with Zone Haven, I recommend that you do. You can go to community.zonehaven.com, and in that you can put in your community, so Napa County, and it will tell you where your zone is. You can find your area through your address, and it will identify the zone for you. And then there's also an app that you can put on your phone that way you can stay informed. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are the products that are available in Zone Haven. If we start from the left, you see a fire map. A map will be, if there is a fire and there's a map available, they'll download it into Zone Haven. It's also got a desktop application, so you can select your zone to find out what's going on, get the updates on if it's been evacuated or not evacuated. And below the computer is that screenshot right here in the middle. That's what those zones are. They're broken up into a geographical location. They have a alpha designator, which is the letters, and then the numbers, which identify which zone you are in. And then to the far right, is the beginning of the Zone Haven app, in which you can download to be informed of if your zone gets an evacuation or something to that effect. Well, I lost the last couple slides. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the last part is evacuations. What are they? Does it pertain to me? How does that work? So evacuations, what it does is it saves lives. It really does. It not only saves lives by leaving the area and evacuating to a safe area, but it also saves the firefighter lives. Because I stated earlier is that our number one priority is life, and we will do everything we have to do to save somebody. If you choose to ignore the evacuation, that jeopardizes our ability to focus on trying to put the fire out so that it doesn't impact the rest of the neighbors and or puts us in jeopardy. So there's a whole bunch of things that are available to you. If you haven't done it, is signing up for Nixle. It's just a notification tool. It's another tool to put into the toolbox to help protect yourself and your family, and also to be informed. The Napa County Sheriff was really genius in handing out that you've been evacuated. These little flyers are available at several different areas throughout the county, at every single one of our fire stations. That is part of your plan. So if you evacuate your structure, you post this on your gate or your mailbox, it lets us know that there's no occupants there. They have been evacuated, so we don't have to worry about the life threat. And there's security that's behind that because we also have all the officers with us. And then lastly is really understanding what is an evacuation warning over an order. The evacuation warning, when it goes out, is the preempt, if you will, to inform you that there is an incident that may impact your property, and there is definitely a potential for life threat. So that's when you really start getting ready. You start packing your car, you ensure you have the fuel, which you should have done prior to that, but you heed that as I'm gonna get ready. So when they say, oh my God, it's an order, I'm gonna leave. And then the evacuation order is just that. It is an order, immediate threat to life. It's a lawful order to leave. And then the area that is lawfully closed to the public. So there is roadblocks, and you've probably seen that through the LNU complex and the glass complex this last summer, that we blocked down all these various roads, limited access. We had police officers posted all over the place to prevent people coming back into the areas. So with that is just remember the 6s when it comes to evacuations: peoples and pets, papers, phone numbers, and important documents, prescription drugs, vitamins and eyeglasses. So the prescription drugs is also a very big one. There are some life-saving drugs that people take each day. Make sure that's part of your kit. Pictures are irreplaceable memorabilia. Personal computers, hard drives, so that you have the ability to restart your life while you're evacuated. In the event we have a catastrophic event and you lose your home, you have the important documents with you. And of course, carrying plastic, some sort of credit card that you can utilize to get some of the things that you may need while you're evacuated. I think that is the last of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Chief Martin. That was really very informative and maybe a little scary. I have to apologize to our next speaker, Sharuk Khanna. I put the slides out of order, so his title slide is not there. But Sharuk has a decade of experience in construction in both private and public projects, such as wind farms, solar farms, heavy highways, bridges, wastewater, and mechanical construction projects. He's co-founder of Fire Maps, a wildfire defense platform that helps homeowners by analyzing homeowner properties with drones and computer vision, creating a recommended treatment plan of defensible space and home hardening, and then facilitating treatments with a network of contractors. So Sharuk, over to you.
Sounds great. And thanks everyone for hanging on. I know it's getting into a lot of information. So I want to keep this as brief as possible so we can hop into the Q&A and make sure we get your questions answered. So, when it comes to home hardening, there's a lot of these terms that get thrown around, and, with the experience we've had working with homeowners trying to make their property as safe as possible, we always try and divide up the conversation between home hardening and defensible space. These are kind of the two levers you have to pull on when evaluating your property. It's how do I get vegetation away from my house? How do I get fuels away? And creating those different zones of 0 to 5, 5 to 30, and 30 to 100 in terms of defensible space and vegetation management. The flip side of that is, what do I do when, say, embers or flames are directly interacting with my house? And that's how we like to talk about that's how we like to talk about home hardening at Fire Maps. And what that is, it's the passive and active systems that your structure has to be able to withstand ember bursts, storms, or fire interaction directly on its siding. And those consist a lot of, what is your home made of? What are the materials you're using, and what is the geometry of your house? So just looking at the brief list here, you can kind of see it comes down to your vents, your gutter guards, which have been mentioned before, siding, porch materials, roof shingles, everything where an ember can either enter a conditioned space or fire can start to do damage to the exterior of your house, which can lead to a structure fire itself. So I just wanted to go through some really simple examples that a homeowner and everyone on this group can kind of take a look at and understand what they're looking at in terms of what home hardening can be. So you can go to the next slide, Piper. So these are just very, very simple examples. We've done a lot of gutter guards on homeowners' properties, and there's always a fear when it comes to putting in measures of defensible space and home hardening. And that is, it's going to ruin the aesthetic of my house. I'm going to lose a lot when it comes to making my home more fire safe. And what we've actually found, and what clients have told us, is that it's not actually making the property worse. It makes it better. With defensible space, they've thought that they would lose the beauty of the trees, but in reality, they actually gained more value within it. They actually enjoyed them more. It's very similar to home hardening. People are worried that gutter guards will look ugly, but they actually like the way they function and the way they look. You can go to the next slide, Piper. And this is also similar for things like vents and metal roofs, which are the more capital intensive things. These vents play such a big role in protecting the structure and not allowing embers and flames to go into conditioned space, that it's very hard for people to kind of work through that process. And so these vents have been created to where they're very simple to apply. They have honeycomb mesh on the interior of them, which actually creates a fire stop once it reaches a flash point of temperature. And they actually look and increase the value of your home, so to say, because people can easily see that this home has been hardened. There's visual cues all around the structure that the previous homeowner or the new builder has created a need and a desire to actually make this house hardened. So you can just see that in different visual cues. So whoever's looking at this presentation, just take a look at these items and try and take them back to your neighborhood and see if you can spot them around different houses. You can go to the next slide, Piper. And here you can see even a few more advanced feature types of home hardening. You can look at stucco siding material, you can look at wood veneer or rock veneer. You can look at hardened windows with tempered glass, making sure they're double paned. And then you can go into the even further aspect of home hardening, which is active systems, which you can see in the photo and on the left. That is a roof sprinkler system. And that's basically made to douse your entire roof and the siding of your structure to not allow ember inflow to settle on your roof, to burn within smoldered elements on the gutters or within the roof shingles. And there's always the question that we've seen is, when do we put on a roof sprinkler system? When do we do these types of hardening features, or when do we spend the money? And what I always like to put out there is, you always want to exhaust as many of your passive measures as you can. Make sure you have your defensible space, make sure you have your gutters, make sure you have your vents before you start to look at some of the more active systems, like putting on a sprinkler system or an exhaustive dispersion system. So just look at it as kind of a pipeline of projects as you live in the house, that the more active systems that you want to put in, make sure you have all of your passive systems in place and working to make sure that they'll protect you in the fire in the most optimal way. And then you can go into the next slide, Piper. And this kind of leads into one of the final points I have about this, and that's working as a community. You know, I've fielded this question many, many times. It's, if I do something but my neighbor doesn't, you know, is there an effect? And the obvious answer is yes. You are protecting your home, you're protecting your structure, you're protecting your property, and defensible space we know works. But the compounding effect of working with your neighbor is not just a couple homes on the street are safe. It's many magnitudes above that. It's a very compounding effect of defensible space and hardening within a neighborhood. For example, there's been studies that show that if you have 7 homes in a row that have completed their defensible space properly and completed their home hardening properly, they can be as effective as a shaded fuel break. And so with everything you've heard and all the effort and the money that is going into what the previous speakers have talked about, every person can play a role in creating an even stronger effect of those fuel breaks that they're building on the ridge lines. Within your neighborhood, you can create a so-called fuel break just by having the proper hardening and having the proper defensible space. And this also goes into what I think a lot of people are concerned about and wanting to know is insurance. What's going on with the insurance world? Piper, you can go to the next slide. And I just wanted to give as much transparency as I have into this world, since you know we've been speaking with insurance companies about this topic. And what we know is that all major insurance companies are putting out wildfire defense requirements. If people haven't already received it, they can go to their provider and request them. And these insurance requirements are falling in line with either remaining on the plan if you are in a high risk area, if there's fear of getting dropped, and there's also premium discounts. So based on where you are and your categorization of high risk, very high risk, or low risk, you will be dropped into one of these categories. And the requirements that these insurance companies are putting out now are falling in line with pretty much everything you've heard from these speakers today. It's defensible space, it's light home hardening, and it's also working together as a community. You can see that we've put down CAL FIRE, IBHS, and falling in line with PRC 4291. I have a sample of what we've seen of some of the requirements just in the fuel management on the right-hand photo, where you can see they're talking about everything within 30 feet of your home, talking within 70 feet of your home, making sure you don't have firewood against your house, making sure you don't have dead trees that are a potential hazard within your house, making sure your fuel tanks or propane tanks are clear of brush and vegetation within the standard requirements. So all of the things that we've been talking about today are things that people can implement on their own, but also get contractors to help and do that work. But when it comes to the insurance world, it's constantly adapting. And I know there's an insurance moratorium that's ending in November. So if people are worried about their insurance, the best thing to do right now is to ask your agent about the specific programs, see if you fall within the 2021 moratorium to where you will not, make sure you're insured, you're not dropped for the next year, and then make sure you request what their specific requirements are to either remain on the plan or get the premium discounts. And then you'll be able to kind of pipeline out the projects you need to do in order to achieve the goal you want. And I think with that, I wanted to just close out my statement and give it back to Piper before we go to Q&A so we can save some time there.
Thanks, Sharuk. We have a little bit of time left, and I hope that some of our panelists will stay over the time, but let me try and go through some of the questions that haven't been answered. Some of them have. Here's one question about brush and debris near a river. And I've heard this from a couple of people. I don't know if anybody has an answer, but apparently there are some concerns about what you're allowed to clear near the Napa River or any of the other rivers and what's being done about that. Does anybody have any information on what can be done with that?
Piper, this is Christopher. So I answered someone who asked that question. the unfortunate reality is that it's a very difficult process. I mean, and I started talking to, well, I should back up. When I first got on the board, I tried to do work within the creek along Crystal Springs Road, and met with a bunch of agencies, and essentially, without any hesitation, they laughed at me and said, you're just not going to get that work done. The permitting is an arduous process at best. And they weren't kidding. And so what we're faced with, as I said in my answer online, which is that some of the agencies in the Valley have not changed the permitting process or the application process in keeping with what we're faced with as a community in terms of fire hazard. And so one of the things that the NCFF is doing is that we are working with some of these agencies, and we're working with Senator Dodd and Mike Thompson and the Board of Supervisors, and putting a lot of pressure on the process by which permitting is issued. CEQA is another example where we keep bumping up against that, where we're trying to get shovel-ready projects. So the answer is it's not easy, but we are aware of it, and we're trying to do something about it. I mean, one thing that's pretty remarkable is if you drive along the Napa River and Crystal Springs Creek and so forth, you'll see how the fire got inside that chute, so to speak, and just raced up the river, jumped the banks, and went into the foliage on both sides of the river banks. So it is very much an issue, and it has to be dealt with. Fish and Game is one of the agencies that has to really change the way they function in that regard. They are a roadblock for getting that kind of permit.
Thank you. I'm trying to see, so there are a lot of questions about specific areas. One of them is about Bothay Park, and will that be cut back to create defensible land? There have been other questions about various municipalities that own land and how we can encourage them. This may fall under that. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I'd like to address that as well. When I was working with Diamond Mountain, we reached out to the local representative of state parks and started to talk to them about the need to do defensible space work. And what I was told at that time was, Christopher, remove the phrase shaded fuel break or fuel break from your vernacular. We don't believe in that. And I told that to Senator Dodd, and evidently that comment went all the way up to top within the parks. So they've changed their attitude, I'm told, and they are willing to do that now. But again, this is an agency that was stuck in the Stone Age in terms of how they looked at a problem versus how that problem actually was for we as a community. So that's something that we're working on. But again, it's a laborious process to get these permits.
Thank you. I understand. Chief Martin, can you go into a little bit more detail about how people can deal with their neighbor's property that is not being attended to, where the defensible space is not done? Are there limitations on that? You had talked about calling the fire marshal's office, but what's the process likely to be like?
What the process would be, I mean, it's a really good question. We get it all the time. And, you know, a lot of neighbors don't want to tell them their neighbors. They try to use the community outreach and work with them, and they get nowhere. And or the homeowners live outside the area. They have a property here within Napa. The first step is making contact with the fire marshal's office, requesting an inspection. And in requesting that inspection is explaining to them what the issue is at hand, especially about an adjoining property. So you can expect that if an inspector, code enforcement agent comes out, they're going to inspect your property first, because we can't show bias. We may do a couple other properties as well. And then we will inspect the property that's in question. We will then send them a notice of any of the violations. There was another question on here about, like, if I have a violation, do I get a fine? You don't get a fine at the beginning. It's really a notification that you have a violation on your property that needs correcting. You have time to get that done. Same with your neighbors. They'll have time to clear their property according to the ordinance. If they decide not to clear their property, then the county will send out a contractor to provide the defensible space on that property, and then they'll put a lien on the property for the property owners to receive the payment. Piper, you're still muted.
Thank you. Thank you. How many inspectors are there, and what's the general time frame from the time of filing a complaint or letting people know and the time there's some action taken?
Well, we kind of have a force modifier, and that is the fire departments. So we have one code enforcement agent that has the ability to write the citations. But they reach out to the fire departments. We have at each one of our stations the ability to go out and inspect a property. And then we relay our findings back to the fire marshal's office, and then they follow up with any appropriate actions that need to happen with that property. So we have all of our firefighters that can go out and do the inspections, and we work together as a team in order to find the solutions.
Great, thank you. Sharuk, you had mentioned an insurance moratorium. Can you tell us what that moratorium is and when it's expected to be over, or what that will mean?
So basically, over the past 3 years, there has been an insurance moratorium, actually coming back from 2018. It's basically an order that's come down from the state that doesn't allow insurers to drop current policyholders from their plans because of fire safety. And these are being renewed in kind of an ad hoc way, to where some insurers are following it, some have, as people have experienced, been able to still be dropped. But what that is usually it's a blanket ban on being dropped from your carrier because of fire risk. And right now there is an active insurance moratorium that is coming to an end in November. And we're just going to continue to monitor to see what the advancement of that is, whether there's going to be one for the following year in 2022, or if there's going to be a change in what the moratorium is going to hold for.
Thank you. This is for anyone who can answer it. Is there any type of flame retardant that can be painted over current paint of a structure?
I can speak to that, but Chief Martin might be able to say something as well. There are fire resistant paints that are available. I think that the application of them would require some expertise. But I know that you can buy fire resistant paints, and I'm not sure whether they can be painted over an existing paint, if that makes a difference or not. I would sort of voice a word of caution that it's one of these sort of fire resistant measures that you could do that you probably don't want to be relying on.
And I could say one of the same. There is a lot of products that are out there that they make a statement that it adds fire resistance to the property, and a lot of us think, oh, now it's fireproof. It's really not. All these products that are out there really do have a limited life expectancy because of the UV rays in the environment. So it's not one product fits the bill as a solution. It really is a whole bunch of various steps that are added to create that hardened component of the property. Limiting the types of materials that are in and around a structure sometimes is as good as treating the structure itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I can add to that. We've had some questions on intumescent paint. If it were my home, I wouldn't sacrifice defensible space or lose budget on defensible space or traditional home hardening to put on paint. But that's just a personal opinion.
Okay, thanks. Chief Martin, what is CAL FIRE or the county fire department's protocol for using property owners' water tanks in unincorporated areas during a fire?
So basically, the Public Resource Code affords to us the ability to use any readily available water source in the event that we have a wildland fire or even a structure fire. There was some questions on here about like private water systems. And again, I know that part of the county building code is requiring there to be a tank for those remote areas, et cetera, with the fire department connection. That's for their water. Now, if we have an event in the county, which we have, in which we're seeking water sources, we come across a private water system, we have the ability to pull water from that in order to continue to fight the fire to reduce the destruction. So we do have the legal right to that water in the event of an emergency.
Okay, thank you. Somebody wrote in, my insurance company offered in a fire to spray retardant on our house. Is this viable? Can it do harm to the structure?
Want to cover that, Chief Martin?
Well, I'm trying to think of what.
I guess it was the red retardant or a foam, maybe.
Yeah, probably. And if it was from an insurance company, their protection measures or what have you. Typically, those foams that they use, they also have a shelf life. We do use them also in our line of work, more on the remote aspect of it, because it has a drain off problem. The backside of it is that it is a soap, like a soap. So it can etch your windows and the metals. And within the valley, we have some really nicely adorned properties that have high-end glass and aluminum and or some sort of metal. So you could risk having some etching to your property.
Okay, thank you. There's some concern. One question is about clearing of burnt trees. Could this cause erosion and landslides? And is that being considered?
I think when we talk about removing of burnt trees and erosion, the trees provide a hazard. They're dead, and it depends if they're close to a roadway. We really would need to know what and where they're at. But typically, as I understand from the hydrologist that I know, that as long as we maintain the root system that's holding the dirt and the stability of the slope, we reduce some of the potential for slides. However, the composition of the soil itself is what leads itself to some sort of mudslide, if something to that effect. So I think it's really case by case. It really depends upon the orientation. But most times it's with the hazard of the trees falling on you is much greater than the potential for the slide.
And I would
Thank you,
just add,
Chief Martin.
I would just add to that what is also causing erosion is the removal of the canopy. The canopy's burned, so all of the rain that is normally absorbed by the canopy of trees is making it down to the forest floor, and that is also so regardless of whether the tree is removed or not, the fact that the canopy is completely gone is a large component to that erosion issue.
Thank you, Christopher. Chief Martin, do you know if, as a result of the chipping program, if the chips are put on the slope, does that gives some erosion protection.
Oh, sure, absolutely. It's just like when they put down hay, it provides that shield so that there's a runoff to the soil. Now, the good thing about the Napa County area is that for the most part, we have really rocky soil. So there's a lot of structure within the soil itself. As Christopher had said before, is that topsoil will run off. But anytime there's any type of shielding that affords protection and allows the water droplets to run off, it's an excellent use of the chips.
Great, thank you. I think you all have been very patient and gone over our allotted time. I think we're going to call this to a close, but I just want to let everybody know that both the recording of the session as well as the presentation will be posted on napafirewise.org. And we will probably send out a follow-up to everybody who registered to give you that link. Also, there were questions about signs. There's some information on that on napafirewise.org as well. And I want to thank first all of the panelists for your wonderful information, and then all of you who joined us and who are interested in becoming part of the solution to preparation for wildfire. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Piper, for leading us
Thanks,
through.
everybody,
Thank
for
you,
putting
everybody.
this together.
Yep, thank you.
Be
For
safe. Take
participating.
care. Have a nice evening.
I